Okay, now you're going to see a movie shot by our father, Benjamin Wherry Lawless Sr., a long time ago when he first learned to use a movie camera. And in the process, you're going to see yourself growing up during a time of Red Grange, the Galloping Ghost of the University of Illinois, and the great Gene Tunney, Jack Dempsey fight shown here, where you see Gene getting his brains knocked out and taking the long count. And I've just got to say right off that that little girl you see now could beat either one of those heavyweights with her tiny little fist tied behind her. I know, and so does Larry. Marjorie Josephine Lawless, or G-Jo as we call her, and she hated that, and Dido as her dad called her, and she got used to that as I got used to my nickname of K.O. And tiny baby Larry got used to his nickname of Rotold Kashinokapocus, given to him by his Uncle Larry. There is tiny baby Larry being held by Willa. I think that's Willa. And then further along, you see Mom playing with our dog at Rogers Park. And then you see her walking outside of Highland Park. And here's Dad with his famous golf swing. And there, right there, you see the house at Highland Park with all of us in the window. And there I am in my little car, and there's Sis pulling a baby carriage. And then there's Larry being pulled along, tiny baby himself. There he goes. One of the craziest things about this film is how many times I am shown, or Larry is shown, or Sis is shown, kissing one or the other. I don't remember this at all. I remember that fists flew more than kisses flew. But the camera doesn't lie, and the evidence is that in the early years there was indeed more kissing than kicking. Now, there were a lot of pictures taken of all of us, usually squinting into the bright sunlight, as we're doing here. There's you, Sis, squinting.
Lots of lovin' keeps you warm as any oven, Margie.
And there I am squinting and a little unsure as to where the camera is. Then Dad says, stick out your tongue, and of course I do that.
You can sit right by my side, let your conscience...
Then here's you, tiny baby, curls and all. You all remember the family reunion. Well, here we are about to go on one, and all of us getting primed for battle, as was our habit. Here am I being carried into the fight. Then the next scene is Dad's mom, Grandmother Lawless. And then you see a long pan of all the brothers and sisters. There's Larry and Lila and Dad and Pat throwing a kiss. There's Nan, and there's Tom, and there's John. And then at the end, and there's Nell, and then at the end, Grandma again. And then back the other way, right here, Uncle Pat gives Grandmother a great big kiss. And then there's some brotherly interplay, the famous handshake. And you throw your thumb over the shoulder. And then there's Grandma again. And that's about the way they went on the surface. Underneath, it was a lot different. Well, maybe it wasn't with all these adults, but boy, with us kids, we were ready for the fight. And here it comes. Okay, Sis, this is you, as I remember you, taking control of the situation. First, have you ever seen so many kicking, squealing, squalling, nasty-looking kids, as we cousins were? Now look at this kid on the left. You've just run him off the picture. But he comes back in shortly thereafter carrying his darned old balloon, and you run him right off again. Now, that's the way we all acted, no matter what anybody says. Now, this is the more refined side of the family. This is Grandma Matlock, a lot quieter than all those kicking, squealing Irishmen. And here she is with Sis and me in my little sailor suit, playing Ring Around the Rosie. Now, in this scene, well, here he is. Here's Dad giving Larry that little old around the head 2 or 3 times to see how dizzy he'd make him, and he made him pretty dizzy. Here we all are on the good ship Aquitania, 1932. Here you are, Sis, strolling on the deck. It must have been before you got seasick. And here you are, Larry. Looks like you've got your sea legs. And then here I come, and it looks like I don't have mine at all. And then you see Sis and I being kind of friendly there, and that didn't last long. And then you see Sis, Aunt Marie, and Mom tucking in for that good old afternoon tea. And then you see Dad and us kids coming down from the upper decks. And that trip seemed to go by in a very short time. And then here we are. The only way I can recognize this scene, I think, is by the sailboats, and those are felucca-type sails, and I think they have to be either at Gibraltar or at Algiers. And I think it's Algiers. Perhaps it's Gibraltar. That rock behind there might be Gibraltar. And then, here it is, Nice. And here we all are, looking up and down the Avenue United States, and having a very good time. And then, unfortunately, there are no more films of this, but we open again with us in the Bois de Boulogne, rolling hoops. And as you can see, Sis, you're a pretty good hoop roller. And Larry, you roll good, lots of style. Now you see us at the at that little park, and again we demonstrate our usual style here. And here's Larry. And Larry, right here, you look so much like your kid Pat. I just can't believe it, because here you are pushing off the boat, and then Dad says, "Hey, Larry, smile," and you give us that old Patrick stance there, see? And here I am pushing mine. Naturally, it doesn't go quite the right way, but I give it a lot of push, and there it goes. Okay, here we are at the battlefields in northern France, where Dad served as Sergeant Major with Battery A, 124th Field Artillery, 33rd Division. Now, he took us here in part because he wanted to reminisce about events 12 years earlier, or 14 years earlier, and in part to show us a little bit of what he'd gone through. And as I remember, the place didn't look quite as bad as I thought it would be. And I think really, for the most part, instead of seeing the horrors of war, we had a pretty damn fine time. Fuzzy Fleming. God knows who he was, but I sure remember the name. I seem to think he was a cook, but I don't think so, because in the next scene, we talk about Morton the cook and all the other belly robbers. And Larry, you remember Morton. He was the guy that ran the restaurant in Springfield, and one day during a battery reunion down there, Dad sent us in as poor orphaned war veteran children who needed a meal. And as I remember it, old Morton was going to give us one until Dad came in and broke up the scene. Now this is a pretty good pan, and it looks like a very handsome little sort of French town. The ravages and the scars of war don't show much here. Now I don't know Saunders and I don't know Pops Brown, but I sure as heck know Uncle Chuck Ruckle of the one arm and the great golf game, Big Jim Hudson, who managed to get drafted back in World War II and became colonel and set Pop on the road to becoming a soldier again until Mother put her foot down, and Uncle Mutt, Turkey, you all remember him. This must have been the kind of place they lived in when the battery was either in line or off the line. Doesn't look too bad now, but it sure must have smelled in those days. Dad must have screwed himself right into the ground with a 360-degree pan like this. Now right here, we were in a town, and as I remember, we had just sung for our supper for the umpteenth time. We'd sung the Marseillaise and the Star-Spangled Banner and anything else Dad could think up, and we'd caged ourselves enough free wine to enjoy the afternoon.
dear. Good morning, Mr. Zip, 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 with your haircut as short as mine. Good morning, Mr. Zip, 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 you're surely looking fine. And if the ashes and dust to dust, if the camels don't get to the placebos...
Now here I am pointing something out. Now Pop calls this a monument. Looks to me like a blasted tree. And I oblige, I pointed out for him. There it is, Dad. Take a look at that one. Jesus, look at that sweater. I remember that from Lake Michigan. This is a beautiful spot. Now, Colonel Hackett, you'll remember, owned this big house, out beyond Highland Park, somewhere out near the Briargate Country Club. And Dad used to take me out there golfing, I remember, and that's where I got to hate golf, because I used to carry that 400-pound golf bag around staggering in the hot sunshine. As I remember it, Colonel Hackett had some big old St. Bernard dogs that used to chase us around, and one of them we used to hook up to a cart. But the town here is lovely. Now this is the great scene where Dad had all those kids line up bow-legged like Uncle Mutt. And I'll bet Uncle Mutt just laughed and laughed when he saw this, and I'll bet Dolly, his wife, laughed even harder, if I remember Dolly. Now Monsek was the high ground that the Germans held and against which the 33rd Division and some other divisions did a lot of battle. Now this is typical 1920 monument architecture, which isn't too impressive. But the site was impressive, and it was around here that we all went up on a hill and drank a little wine and did some watercolors, and then to our amazement, Aunt Marie started to roll down the hill, followed shortly by Dad and then Mom, and then gleefully by all of us kids. That was some afternoon. Right about here, we decided that we had to go see these sheep, and Mom and Dad and everybody, we all just kind of got out of the cars, I remember, and we had to go look at those sheep. And there was this one black sheep. You can see the herder catching it now. And that one black sheep thought that Mother's coat was its brother, and I think it probably was. Now here's another view of Mont Sec coming up. And boy, that hill sure stuck up on that landscape like a sore thumb. I can see why they got all the artillery around here and shelled that thing into nothingness. But it took a lot of doing and a lot of people, I guess, and that's why they have a cemetery here. Now here's another little town that seems to have not recovered quite so fully from the war as some of the others, but a pretty little town. And here's the taxi driver that Mom and Dad met in Verdun, and gradually over a period of several days argued about how much it would cost to take a taxi to the battlefields. And every day he would come down a little bit, and Mom and Dad would go up a little bit in their price, and finally over a bottle of wine, off we went.
You're the only girl that I adore. When the moon shines over the cowshed, I'll be waiting at the kitchen door. Beautiful Katie, you're the only girl that I adore. When the moon shines over the cowshed, I'll be waiting at the kitchen door.
Now here we are with the taxi driver. I don't remember him very well, but Sis, you must. And obviously Dad in English had said something about, hey, give us a funny look. And there you go, Sis, that's the old eye roll there. And Larry, I don't know what you're doing, but it's pretty weird. I'm sure glad he didn't look at us.
Now he's off to France,
Now here is where Colonel Hackett was wounded, rather seriously as I remember it. And again, these flat fields, these long vistas of northwestern France. Boy, it takes a sergeant major with some knowledge of of triangulation and map work to be able to go back after 14 years and find the exact spot where an action occurred, probably in the middle of the night, with a lot of emotion and everything else. But he did it. He says this is where it all happened. Now, Death Valley is the incident mentioned in Bob Casey's book, The Cannoneers Have Hairy Ears, where the 124th Field Artillery, and Battery A especially, somehow, through some mix-up, and it must have been very unusual, got out in front of the infantry, got lost, got attacked, and finally were firing point blank at the Germans. It was rather a good chapter in the book. You remember that book, The Cannoneers Have Hairy Ears, They Slap Their Leather Breeches, They da-da-da, da-da-da-da, those hard-boiled sons of bitches. I also remember that the book falls open at the exact page upon which Dad is mentioned. We used to look at it so much. Or at least I did. Now, once again, the old battalion sergeant major, with his triangulation and his map reading, has found the exact spot where his battery was upon a certain day in 1918. Now, later on, you'll see the hill over which the battery was firing at the Germans, and it was this place that Dad was relieved as battalion sergeant major and sent back to officers' candidate school in Paris. And I remember him telling that story about how he was so hungry and his pants were in such poor shape that he at one time stole a pair of pants from someone, and then went right out and stole a food pass from an officer and proceeded to eat 25 meals in one day, a condition that he kept up throughout his lifetime until that fateful day when he ate the dish rag off Mom's stove thinking it was soup, and then limped around for days swearing that Mom had poisoned him. Boy, that was a funny one. I remember this monument, the one up at Montsec that you've seen before, and this one here as being long rows of tombstones and very quiet. There wasn't anybody there. Just tombstones and this flag. And it was kind of an eerie feeling. I remember that. I didn't think there were that many soldiers in the whole army. Certainly not that many dead, but I guess there were. And so that's it, guys. That's the way it all looked from the fragments of pictures that I could save from the great quantity of pictures that Dad had taken. I've kept everything, but these will last a long time, and I think you ought to kind of take good care of them. And so Davy and Ann and Pat and Liz and Leslie and Carrie and Susie and Benji, that's what all those stories are about. That's our childhood a long time ago. Now, maybe your grandfather and our dad wasn't much of a photographer, but he had one good thing. He sure kept that camera pointed at those he loved, and that's what it was all about. So when you hear those stories tell you, some of them were true, most of them were true. Maybe not all of them were true. But gee, sometimes it was bigger than life. So here I am, 40 years later, signing for Dad, Benjamin Wary Lawless, Jr.